This painting tutorial follows on from the last video where we built a Glidebait using the Stitch 6 mold kit. If you haven't seen that one yet, there's a link in the description. So now that the lure has been tested and the swim tuned, it's time to prep it for paint. We'll start by filling in any holes or rough areas. I'm using a water-based filler, the same stuff you'd use on walls. I think it's called spackle in some parts of the world. That said, feel free to use your preferred method, baking soda and super glue, putty or anything similar. Fill the holes and spread a thin layer over the pour spout areas if they're still a bit rough. Let it dry, then sand it back. I like using these sanding sponges from Amazon. Once that's done, apply a generous coat of primer over the same areas. Let it dry, then sand again. You can repeat this step if needed to get things smooth. Next, brush super glue over the back and along the belly of the bait. I'm using the type with a brush applicator. You could also use epoxy or UV resin here, but super glue is quick, easy and gets the job done. The thick, self-leveling properties of the glue, epoxy or resin help create a nice smooth surface for painting. Once it's dry, give the glue a light sanding, mainly to scuff up the glossy surface so the paint sticks better. Now you can prime the bait white. While it's not shown in the video, make sure to follow the same prep and priming steps for the tail section as well. Apply some low-tack masking tape to the cheeks to protect them from overspray. Hold down the tape with your thumb where the bends occur and carefully fold it around to follow the contours of the gill covers. You don't need to be too precise, you're not painting the tape directly. It's just there to protect the upward facing surfaces of the facial features from light overspray while painting the dorsal. Next we'll paint the back green. I'm using Bloodline Vial green, but you can substitute it with whatever you have. Wicked Moss green for example, any natural green or olive tone will work. Spray the dorsal fin from the side, but for the rest of the back spray from above. We're not bringing the colour down the sides much, just keeping it up top. The next colour is Bloodline Decay. You can substitute it with any transparent dark brown. Wicked Sepia would work well for example. We'll concentrate the dark brown at the ends of each segment of the bait. Also hit just the very top edge of the dorsal fin. We'll also darken the upper region of the eye socket, blending it smoothly into the darkened nose area on top. Apologies for the focusing issues in this small part of the footage. I'm about to move things inside and the video becomes much clearer and properly focused from that point on. Darken along the very edge of the anal fin, just like we did with the dorsal fin. Now you can go ahead and remove the masking tape. The last step before heading indoors is to bring a light sickly yellow olive green slightly down the sides. I'm using Plague Bearer's Flesh Wash by Citadel. Since it doesn't come in a dropper bottle, use a pipette to transfer it. Next we'll brush on white pearl mica powder. I'm using Pearl X Micro Pearl for this step. Throughout this tutorial I'll be using a few different types of paintbrushes. The first is a general purpose synthetic brush. This is the type I use about 90% of the time. They come in packs of 12 on Amazon and despite being cheap the quality is surprisingly good. I'll leave a link in the description. The white areas shown in this graphic are where you'll apply the mica powder, but don't worry about being too precise. It's perfectly fine if it gets on other parts of the bait. Mica powder can be brushed on dry. It sticks well to the surface and can be locked down later with Intercoat clear, transparent base, varnish, etc. I accidentally missed recording the application to the head section of the bait, but the process is exactly the same as what I'm doing here on the rear section. Just brush on the mica powder in the areas shown earlier in the graphic. When you're finished, use your airbrush to spray transparent base, Intercoat clear, or any transparent medium of your choice over the area to lock the mica powder in place. In the next section we'll be using Vallejo Bloody Red, applied to the areas shown in the graphic. Again, precision isn't too important here, so don't stress about getting it perfect. The next colour is Vallejo Flesh, applied to the areas shown in the graphic. Here we're still using the general purpose synthetic brush. In the next section we'll be using a technique called dry brushing, where having a specialised brush really makes a difference. There's a link in the description for the brush I will be using. These brushes are thick, round and have a flat end, perfect for dry brushing. The colour we'll be dry brushing is white. I'm using Dio dry brushing paint by MIG Ammo, but any good quality paint should work just fine. Dip just the tip of the brush into the paint, then remove most of it by wiping the brush on a piece of wood or cardboard. Use both strokes and circular motions to evenly distribute and remove the excess paint. You're aiming to take off about 95% of the paint. The only areas we'll be dry brushing are over the red. Gently scrub back and forth and use circular motions over those sections. The key to dry brushing is patience. Don't expect strong results right away. It's a gradual process as the colour slowly builds up. After a while you can reload your brush with a bit more paint and remove the excess just like before, then continue building up the highlights gradually. YouTube has hundreds of in-depth tutorials on dry brushing. I've linked a few in the description that I've found especially informative and helpful. Repeat the same dry brushing technique over all the red areas, including those on the rear section of the bait. Next we'll apply a subtle glaze over the skin areas of the bait. To create it, mix 2 parts Citadel Contrast Medium with 1 part Citadel Reikland Flesh Shade. Apply the glaze over the same areas where the pearl was added earlier. If it runs outside those areas, that's totally fine. It's a subtle effect, so precision isn't critical here. This glaze will act like a subtle wash, flowing into the crevices and enhancing detail. Keep it light and mop up any pooling as you go. I haven't shown the tail section, but the same approach applies there as well. Next we'll apply a wash using Reikland Flesh Shade straight from the bottle, no thinning this time. A brush has 2 roles when washing. When full it lays paint down. As it empties it starts to act like a sponge, lifting excess paint off the surface. As you can see on the left, the wash is pooling. As I move to the right, the brush holds less paint and starts acting like a sponge. I can now go back and mop up any excess. This back and forth process helps evenly distribute the wash, just enough to darken the recesses without heavy pooling. It's intuitive, fun, and a very forgiving way to paint. This flesh-coloured wash helps unify the underlying colours and adds contrast. It gives the red and pink tones a more natural, organic look, like gory flesh that's been eaten away by worms and parasites, leaving behind web-like tendrils of tissue and sinew. Washes can sometimes leave a harsh, unattractive edge. Here's how to fix that. Rinse your brush in clean water, wipe off the excess and use it to gently feather and blend the edge of the wash for a smoother transition. I forgot to mention, washes are best applied with a general purpose synthetic brush. Avoid using your good brushes for washes. Next we'll apply the same wash to the stitches, this time slightly thinned with contrast medium for a more controlled subtle effect. Notice that I only apply the wash to the stitches about 2/3 of the way up the bait. The stitches on the upper third will be washed with a different colour. Run a line of wash along the crevices behind the gill covers. If it creates a harsh edge, feather it out with a clean, damp brush. Apply the same wash to the pectoral fins and the anal fin as well, keeping it consistent with the rest of the bait. Now we'll wash the stitches on the upper portion of the bait using Citadel Plaguebearer's Flesh. Red and green are the main colours in this scheme. They're complementary, meaning they're opposites on the colour wheel, and create strong contrast and balance. They also contrast in how they read on flesh. The red hues of the flesh wash suggest life and vitality, while the green wash suggests sickness and decay. When you blend the two, the result is especially grotesque. As you bring the green wash down, let it overlap slightly with the flesh wash to create a sickly blended hue. You can also add it to a few select areas for extra effect, just don't go overboard. A little goes a long way. Remember to use the clean, damp brush method to feather out any areas that need softening. It helps blend the washes smoothly and avoids harsh edges. Next is Citadel Carrowbird Crimson Wash, thinned slightly with contrast medium. Apply the crimson wash to the areas we previously painted with the flesh colour. I used 2 different approaches to the wound areas because dry brushing higher up would leave visible white on the darker colours, which can look messy. Also, having 2 different approaches to the wound areas adds variety and creates more visual interest. Furthermore, we'll be adding Coelia green shade to the upper stitches later, which perfectly complements the dark magenta tones of Carrowbird Crimson. Next we'll paint each individual stitch on the upper region using Vallejo Dead Flesh. Here's where we switch to a specialized detail brush. There's a link in the description for the one I'm using. It's a natural hairbrush made from Kolinsky Sable, a type of rodent. The key to a good detail brush is how well it holds and maintains a fine point, and Kolinsky Sable brushes are renowned for that. A magnifying tool, whether it's a magnifying lamp or magnifying glasses, can really help with this step. To maintain a perfect point on your detail brush, there are a few key practices to keep in mind. I've included a link in the description to a video that explains how to properly care for a Kolinsky Sable brush. You don't have to paint the entire stitch. A small highlight in the middle of each one actually looks better and is easier to do. The stitches on the lower 2/3 of the bait will be painted bone white. The footage is sped up to save time, but the process is the same. Paint all of the stitches on both segments of the bait using this method. Incidentally, all of my baits were specifically designed to work with washes, dry brushing and other techniques borrowed from the world of miniature painting. You can use these same methods to get the most out of the other baits in the mould range as well. For example, my various crawfish crankbaits feature deep, intricate details that hold washes perfectly, along with raised, angular surfaces that really catch dry brushing. All of them are designed with accentuated surface textures for exactly this reason. Paint the teeth with the same bone white colour. Then wash the mouth with Carroburg Crimson. Vallejo Pearl Blue will be used to paint some of the veins textured into the bait's surface. We won't paint all the veins, just a select few to add a bit of grossness. Painting too many in blue could make the design look too busy. Your fine-pointed Kolinsky Sable brushes, once again essential for intricate details like these. Painting these fine lines might take a bit of practice. If you're not comfortable with it yet, feel free to skip this step. In fact, you could skip both the vein detail and painting each individual stitch, and still end up with a great looking bait. Next we'll wash the upper stitches with Coelia Green Shade. Use the clean, damp brush technique to feather it in where the stitches run down vertically. And that wraps up the painting. All that's left is to clear coat, assemble and add the eyes. Any type of clear coat will work, epoxy, UV resin or whatever you prefer. I designed the bait to accommodate 5mm, 6mm and even up to 7mm eyes, depending on the look you're after. For a shriveled zombie-like eye in a gore-filled socket, go with a 5mm. For a more standard look, use a 6 or 7mm eye to fill out the socket more fully. I went with a 5mm solid black eye. I love getting questions, so feel free to drop anything you're curious about in the comments. Always happy to help however I can. I designed and sculpted this bait from scratch. If you'd like to make your own, the mould is available in my shop. I've also got a selection of other mould types, so feel free to check out my website if you're interested. My website is followforms.net, there's a link in the description. I'm currently waiting on some silicone dye to properly colour my tail fins. You can find it on Amazon. For this tail, I used alcohol ink pens, and honestly it looks a bit messy. I'm not really happy with it, but the dyed tails should look much cleaner and more polished. Thanks so much for watching, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I'm Followforms on both Facebook and Instagram.